My grandmother clinked her crystal champagne flute against the side of the table, and the sharp sound cut through the low hum of jazz music filling the private dining room. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and a smile that lit up her 85-year-old face. Amara, she said, her voice trembling with emotion, I am so proud of the woman you have become, but mostly I am proud of your discipline. I have watched you struggle through 6 years of university and graduate school, working 2 jobs, living in that tiny apartment, driving that beat-up sedan. You never asked for a penny. You let the $5.8 million I set aside for you grow untouched in the trust fund. That is the kind of stewardship that builds dynasties. The room went silent. I froze, my hand hovering over my glass of water. $5.8 million. I stared at my grandmother, and then I looked at my parents sitting across from me. My mother dropped her silver fork, and it clattered loudly against her china plate. My father suddenly found the pattern on the tablecloth incredibly interesting. I felt the blood drain from my face as the realization hit me like a physical blow. I did not have $5.8 million. I had $150,000 in student loan debt and $40 in my checking account. Before I tell you how this dinner ended with the FBI raiding a birthday party 3 months later, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever discovered that the people who were supposed to protect you were actually the ones holding the knife. I am Amara Jenkins, 32 years old, and until that night at the Capitol Grill in downtown Atlanta, I thought my life was defined by bad luck and hard work. I had just graduated with my MBA, finishing top of my class, but I felt more exhausted than accomplished. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. The air in the restaurant smelled of aged steak and expensive truffle oil. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Atlanta skyline glittered in the twilight, a world of wealth that I always felt was just out of my reach. I looked around the table. My sister Tasha was busy taking selfies with her new iPhone, while her husband Kyle, my brother-in-law, was loudly complaining to the waiter about the vintage of the wine. They were the golden couple of the family, always dressed in the latest fashion, always going on vacations, while I stayed home and studied. Grandma Hattie was still standing, waiting for me to say something to acknowledge her generous gift. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask her what on earth she was talking about, but before I could make a sound, my mother Vivian kicked me hard under the table. Her heel dug into my shin, but her face remained a mask of perfect composure. She reached out and placed her hand over mine, her grip tight and painful. Amara is just overwhelmed. Mama, she said, her voice overly bright and dripping with fake sweetness. She is in shock. We all are. Isn't that right, Carl? My father looked up, his eyes darting nervously between Grandma and me. Yes, absolutely, he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a linen napkin. It is a lot to process. Sit down, Mama, let's eat before the filet mignon gets cold. But Grandma remained standing, her gaze fixed on me. I set that trust up when you were 18, Amara, she continued. I made your parents the trustees until you turned 25, and then I assumed you took over. I get the statements sent to my accountant, but I never checked the details because I trusted you. You haven't withdrawn a single cent in 14 years. That kind of patience is rare. I barely heard her. My mind was racing. When I turned 25, my parents told me there was a small savings account for me, but that the market crash had wiped it out. They told me I had to take out loans for grad school. They told me they were broke. I looked at Tasha. She was not looking at me. She was staring at her husband, Kyle. Kyle was white as a sheet. He let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded like a bark. Grandma, you are confused again, he said, waving his hand dismissively. You know how your memory gets in the evenings? Amara doesn't have $5 million. Look at her dress. It is from Target. If she had that kind of money, she wouldn't be driving a Honda Civic with a taped-up bumper. He looked around the table for support. A desperate grin plastered on his face. Right, Amara. Tell Grandma she is mixing you up with one of her old business partners. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I looked at Kyle. I looked at the beads of sweat forming on his upper lip. I looked at his hands, which were trembling slightly as he tried to hide his phone under the table. And then I looked at my mother. Her eyes were wide, pleading, warning me to keep my mouth shut. And in that split second, everything clicked. The reason my parents never helped with my tuition. The reason Tasha and Kyle bought a boat last year despite neither of them having a steady job. The reason my father retired early. I took a slow breath. I picked up my wine glass and stood up. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to smile. "Thank you, Grandma," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "I am overwhelmed. It is more than I ever expected." Grandma beamed and sat down satisfied, but as I sat back down, I saw Kyle exhale a long breath of relief. He thought he had dodged a bullet. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was just the quiet, bookish sister who did what she was told. He had no idea that beneath the table my hand was already reaching for my purse. "Excuse me," I said, standing up again. "I need to use the restroom." I barely took 2 steps before my mother was at my side, hooking her arm through mine. "I will join you," she said, her nails digging into my bicep. We walked to the ladies' room in silence, the click of our heels on the marble floor echoing like gunshots. The moment the heavy oak door closed behind us, my mother spun me around. Her face, which had been so sweet out in the dining room, twisted into a snarl. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so the other patrons wouldn't hear. "Do you want to kill your grandmother? She has a heart condition, Amara. If you upset her, you will give her a stroke. Is that what you want? On your graduation day?" I pulled my arm away from her grasp. "I want to know where the money is, Mom," I said. $5.8 million. Grandma said she funded it when I was 18. You told me there was no money. You signed the loan papers with me. You watched me work double shifts at the library. Where is it?" My mother sighed, rolling her eyes as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a piece of candy. "Oh, grow up, Amara," she said, walking over to the mirror and adjusting her hair. "We invested it for you, your father and I. We wanted to grow it. But the market is volatile. You know that. You have an MBA, don't you? Investments go up and investments go down. We lost it. It is gone. Gone," I repeated. "All of it. $5.8 million just vanished." "Yes, vanished," she snapped, turning to face me. "And do not look at me like that. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We made sacrifices. And now you are going to go out there and you are going to smile and you are going to thank your grandmother and you are never going to mention this again. Do you understand? We are doing this to protect her. If she finds out the money is lost, it will break her heart." I looked at my mother, really looked at her for the first time in years. I looked at the diamond necklace resting against her throat. I recognized it now. It was a Tiffany solitaire, probably worth $20,000. I looked at her handbag sitting on the vanity counter. It was a Hermes Birkin. Tasha had one just like it in pink. My father drove a brand new Mercedes. Kyle had just posted on Instagram about his new crypto mining rig. They didn't lose the money. They ate it. They wore it. They drove it. A cold calm washed over me. It was a sensation I had never felt before. It was the death of the daughter who sought approval, and the birth of the woman who sought revenge. If I screamed now, if I dragged Grandma in here and told her the truth, they would deny it. They would say I was lying or crazy. They would have time to hide the paper trail. They would have time to cover their tracks. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be patient. "You are right, Mom," I said, keeping my face blank. "We shouldn't upset Grandma." My mother's shoulders relaxed. She smiled that condescending smile I knew so well. "Good girl," she said, patting my cheek. "I knew you would be reasonable. Now fix your lipstick. You look pale." She turned and walked out of the restroom, confident that she had once again managed to control me. I stood there for a moment staring at my reflection in the mirror. I took out my phone. My hands were not shaking anymore. I opened my encrypted messaging app and found the contact name Simone. Simone was my roommate from undergrad, who now worked as a senior auditor at the Federal Reserve. I typed a single message. Need a favor. Run a full trace on a trust fund account. Tax ID ending in 459. Name Amara Jenkins. I think I am the victim of identity theft and wire fraud. I watched the 3 dots appear as Simone typed back immediately. On it. Give me an hour. I put the phone back in my purse, applied a fresh coat of red lipstick, and walked back out into the dining room. As I approached the table, Kyle was laughing at something Tasha said, pouring himself another glass of expensive wine. He looked up and saw me and raised his glass in a mocking toast. To the graduate, he said, smirking. The girl with the phantom millions. I sat down and picked up my water glass. To family, I said softly. I watched Kyle drink. Enjoy it, Kyle, I thought. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the steak. Enjoy the feeling of the silk napkins. Because I am going to take it all. I am going to take the house. I am going to take the cars. I am going to take the boat. And when I am done with you, you won't even have enough money to buy a stamp to write home from prison. My phone buzzed silently in my lap. I glanced down. It was a notification from Simone. Holy Amara. You need to see this. I smiled at my grandmother. The game had officially begun. The sun rose over Atlanta with a cruel brightness that hurt my eyes. I had not slept a single minute. I sat at my small kitchen table in my cramped apartment staring at my laptop screen, waiting for the notification from Simone. My apartment was so small that if I stretched out my arms I could touch the refrigerator and the stove at the same time. The paint was peeling in the corner, and the faucet dripped with a rhythmic, maddening sound. This was my reality. A reality of scrimping, saving, and worrying about every single dime while my family lived like royalty. At 7:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed against the hardwood of the table. It was a secure email from Simone. The subject line consisted of a single word in all capital letters. Urgent. My hands were cold as I clicked the link. I expected to see something bad. I expected to see mismanagement, or maybe some bad stock trades that had lost 20 or 30% of the portfolio. I was prepared for incompetence. I was not prepared for total annihilation. The PDF file opened, and the first thing I saw was the summary balance page. The number was 0.00. I blinked, thinking the screen had not loaded correctly. I refreshed the page. The zero stared back at me, black and final. $5.8 million, gone, evaporated into thin air. I scrolled down to the transaction history, and that is when the nausea hit me. It rose in my throat, bitter and acidic. This was not investment loss. This was a looting. It was a systematic draining of my future carried out over 4 years with surgical precision. I saw a wire transfer dated 3 years ago, $2.1 million. The recipient was listed as Willow Creek Estates. I froze. I knew that name. That was the development company that built my parents' massive Georgian-style mansion in Buckhead. The house they claimed they bought with the profits from selling my father's old business. The house where I was told I was not welcome to stay after college because I needed to learn independence. I bought that house. Me. Every brick, every marble column, every square inch of the manicured lawn belonged to me. I was paying the mortgage, the property taxes, and the landscaping fees for a home I was kicked out of. I scrolled further. There were monthly transfers of $50,000, sometimes more, to an entity called K&T Holdings, LLC, K&T, Kyle and Tasha. It was so blatant, it was insulting. They had set up a shell company using their initials and funneled my inheritance directly into their pockets. I clicked on the sub-report Simone had attached, analyzing K&T Holdings. It was a dummy corporation, no employees, no products, no revenue, just a bank account that received my money and immediately spent it on lifestyle expenses. $1.5 million had gone into that black hole. I saw the itemized credit card bills linked to the account. A week at the Four Seasons in the Maldives totaling $45,000. I remembered that week. Tasha had posted photos of herself drinking coconut water on a white sand beach captioned, "Living my best life." I was cat-sitting for them that week eating ramen noodles because I was trying to save money for textbooks. There was a charge for a Porsche Cayenne Turbo, $130,000, Kyle's car, the car he drove to my graduation dinner, the car he bragged about to anyone who would listen, claiming he bought it with crypto gains. He did not buy it with crypto. He bought it with my trust fund. Then came the final blow, the withdrawal authorizations. Since the trust was in my name, any withdrawal over $10,000 required my signature. I pulled up the scanned images of the authorization forms. There at the bottom of the page was my name, Amara Jenkins. But it was not my handwriting. The J in Jenkins looped too wide, the slant was too vertical. I knew that handwriting. I had seen it on permission slips when I was a child. I had seen it on birthday cards. It was my mother's handwriting. She had practiced. I could see the effort she made to copy my signature, but she could not hide the muscle memory of her own hand. My mother, the woman who gave birth to me, the woman who lectured me about integrity and faith, had sat at her kitchen table and forged my name hundreds of times to steal my life away. I did not cry. The shock that had paralyzed me the night before dissolved, replaced by a cold, hard fury. It felt like steel settling in my spine. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the quiet, obedient daughter who would never question them. They thought they could commit a felony and buy me off with a graduation dinner. I hit print. The sound of my cheap inkjet printer whirring to life filled the silent apartment. Page after page slid into the tray, the bank statements, the wire transfers, the forged signatures, the real estate deeds. I printed it all. The stack of paper grew thick and heavy, a physical weight of their betrayal. I grabbed a plain manila folder and shoved the documents inside. I did not bother to change out of my sweatpants. I did not bother to put on makeup. I grabbed my car keys and walked out the door. My Honda Civic struggled to start the engine, coughing before finally turning over. The irony was not lost on me as I backed out of my parking space. I was driving a car worth less than $2,000 to confront people who had stolen nearly $6 million from me. The drive to Buckhead took 30 minutes. I drove in silence. No radio, no music. Just the sound of the tires on the pavement and the pounding of my own heart. I rehearsed what I would say. I thought about screaming. I thought about throwing things. But as I turned onto their street, a street lined with oak trees and multi-million-dollar estates, I realized that screaming was what children did. I was not a child anymore. I was a creditor, and I was coming to collect. I pulled into the long circular driveway of the house I bought. The Porsche was parked out front, shining in the morning sun. My father's Mercedes was next to it. It looked peaceful. It looked perfect. A portrait of the American dream built on a foundation of lies and theft. I killed the engine. I picked up the manila folder. It felt hot in my hands, like it was burning with the truth inside. I got out of the car and slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet neighborhood. I walked up the stone steps to the massive double doors. I did not knock. I still had my key, the one they gave me for emergencies only. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked open. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive potpourri that drifted out from the foyer. This was it. There was no going back. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool, air-conditioned lie that was my parents' house. The war had begun. The heavy oak door swung open, and I stepped into the foyer of the house on Mockingbird Lane. The air inside smelled of lemon furniture polish and the slow roasted pot roast my mother always made on Sundays. Gospel music was playing softly from the living room speakers, a song about grace and forgiveness that felt like a slap in the face given what I held in my hand. I walked past the grand staircase, past the oil paintings of ancestors who were not actually related to us, but looked distinguished enough to hang on the wall, and into the great room. My parents were there just as I expected. My father Carl was sitting in his leather recliner reading the newspaper, while my mother Vivian was arranging white lilies in a crystal vase. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, a scene from a magazine. And every single thing in the room, from the Persian rug under my father's feet to the silk curtains framing the windows, was paid for with money stolen from my future. I did not say hello. I did not ask how they were. I walked straight to the mahogany coffee table and slammed the manila folder down with as much force as I could muster. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. The lilies in the vase trembled. My father lowered his paper, slowly peering over his reading glasses. My mother let out a dramatic gasp, pressing a hand to her chest. Amara. Lord have mercy, my mother said, her voice dripping with performative shock. You nearly gave me a heart attack. What is wrong with you storming in here like a wild animal? We are listening to the gospel hour. Show some respect. Respect, I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. You want to talk about respect? How about the respect you showed when you forged my signature 300 times? How about the respect of stealing $5.8 million from your own daughter? I pointed a shaking finger at the folder. It is all there, Mom. The wire transfers, the fake shell company, the cars, the vacations. I know everything. I know about K&T Holdings. I know you drained my trust fund to zero. The room went deadly silent. I waited for the shame. I waited for them to hang their heads, to cry, to beg for forgiveness. I waited for my father, the man who had served as a deacon for 20 years, to fall to his knees and pray for redemption. But that did not happen. My father simply folded his newspaper neatly and placed it on the side table. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, letting out a long, weary sigh, as if I were a teenager asking to borrow the car after being grounded. Amara, you are being incredibly dramatic, he said, his voice calm and patronizing. We did not steal anything. We reallocated family resources. That money was sitting there doing nothing. It was stagnant. The scripture says we must be good stewards of our talents, not bury them in the ground. You buried it in a Porsche, I snapped. You buried it in a trip to the Maldives. How is that stewardship? It was for the family, my mother chimed in, walking over to stand behind my father's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. They presented a united front, a wall of delusion I could not break through. Your sister and Kyle needed a jump start. Kyle has a vision, Amara. He is an entrepreneur. He just needed capital. And we needed to maintain this house. Do you know how much the upkeep is on a property like this? We did this for all of us so we could have a gathering place. A legacy. A legacy, I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. This house is in your name. The cars are in your names. I have nothing. I am drowning in student debt while you live like royalty on my dime. You sacrificed me. You sacrificed my security so Tasha could play rich housewife. My father stood up, then his face hardening. He drew himself up to his full height, using that imposing posture he reserved for ushering rowdy kids out of the church sanctuary. Watch your tone, young lady, he boomed. You are single, Amara. You have no children, no husband, you have a job. You can take care of yourself. Tasha has a family, she has a baby. The Bible tells us that the strong must bear the infirmities of the weak. We made a command decision as the heads of this household. We helped the child who needed it most. You should be happy that you were able to provide for your nephew, even if you didn't know it. That is the ultimate charity. I stared at him, unable to comprehend the twisted logic. He was using my single status as a weapon. He was telling me that because I had focused on my education and career, instead of marrying the first man who looked my way, I deserved to be robbed. Before I could respond, I heard slow clapping coming from the staircase. I looked up to see Kyle descending the stairs. He was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my rent, and he was holding a green apple which he bit into with a loud crunch. He looked relaxed, arrogant, and completely unbothered. Bravo, Carl, he said, grinning as he reached the bottom step. You tell her. Family first, right? He walked over to the coffee table, picked up the folder, and flipped through it casually. He didn't even read the pages. He just glanced at them and tossed the folder back down as if it were junk mail. Impressive research, Amara Kyle said, leaning against the fireplace mantel. Really top-notch. I can see why you got good grades. But here's the thing you are missing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You committed wire fraud, Kyle. That is a federal crime. Kyle laughed, shaking his head. It was an investment. A bad one, sure, but an investment. The crypto market crashed. The real estate deals went south. It happens to the best of us. The money is gone, Amara. Poof. And as for the fraud allegations, good luck proving intent. Your parents had power of attorney for years. It is a gray area. And even if you somehow drag us to court, what are you going to get? He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the room. I am declaring bankruptcy next week, he said smugly. Chapter 7. Personal and Corporate. The slate gets wiped clean. You can sue me all you want, but you can't get blood from a stone. And as for Carl and Vivian, here are you really going to drag your elderly parents into a courtroom? Are you going to put your mother on the stand? Think about how that will look to the church. Think about what people will say. The ungrateful daughter attacking the people who gave her life over money. You won't do it. You don't have the stomach for it. He took another bite of his apple, chewing loudly. You are a paper tiger, Amara, he said, his mouth full. You roar, but you don't bite. So be a good girl, go home to your little apartment and let us handle the grown-up business. Maybe when I get back on my feet, I will write you a check for your tuition. Or maybe not. I looked at my parents. They were nodding in agreement with him. My mother looked at me with pity, not for herself, but for me. Pity that I didn't understand how the world worked. Pity that I was so selfish. Something inside me snapped. But it wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock falling into place. For 32 years, I had tried to buy their love with obedience. I had stayed quiet. I had made myself small, so Tasha could feel big. I had let them take and take and take, hoping that one day they would look at me and say thank you. But they never would. To them, I was not a person. I was a resource. I was a bank account with a pulse. And now that the account was empty, I was an annoyance. I looked at Kyle. I looked at the smirk on his face. I looked at my father's self-righteous glare. I looked at my mother's fake concern. And I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a cold, sharp expression that didn't reach my eyes. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the prey has walked into a trap. You are right, Kyle. I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I don't want to drag this out in family court. It is messy. And you are right about the bankruptcy too. It is a powerful tool. I reached out and picked up the folder, smoothing the cover. If you want to play by the rules of the legal system, then that is exactly what we will do, I said. I am glad we had this talk. It clarifies everything. I turned around and walked toward the door. My steps were light. The heavy burden of guilt I had carried for years, the feeling that I had to protect them, was gone. I left it on that Persian rug. Where are you going, Amara? My mother called out, her voice laced with uncertainty for the first time. You are staying for dinner, aren't you? I made pot roast. I didn't turn back. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. Enjoy the roast, Mom, I said over my shoulder. And Kyle, enjoy the house, while you still can. I closed the door behind me. As I walked to my car, I could hear Kyle laughing inside. She is bluffing, he shouted. She is a total coward. I got into my Honda and started the engine. I looked at the house one last time. I wasn't a coward, and I wasn't a paper tiger. I was the storm that was coming for them, and they didn't even have an umbrella. I pulled my phone out and dialed my lawyer. It is done, I said as I pulled out of the driveway. Proceed with phase 2. Buy the debt. The game was over. The war had just begun. The silence that followed my departure from my parents' house was absolute. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex and performed the digital amputation of my family. I opened my phone and went to my contacts. First my father, block caller, then my mother, block caller, then Tasha, block caller, and finally Kyle, block caller. With each tap of the screen, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for their approval. I was not waiting for their criticism. I was simply gone. For the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost. They tried to reach me, of course. My voicemail filled up with messages from blocked numbers. I did not listen to a single one. I simply deleted them. Simone told me they were telling people I had a mental breakdown. They told the church choir I was suffering from jealousy and depression because of my sister's success. They spun a narrative where I was the unstable villain and they were the long-suffering saints who just wanted to help me. I watched them from the shadows. I created a burner Instagram account with a fake name and followed Tasha. It was painful, but it was necessary intelligence gathering. 2 days after I confronted them, Tasha posted a photo. She was at the Ritz-Carlton at Lake Oconee wearing a white bikini and holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Family is everything. Sometimes you have to cut out the toxic negative energy to protect your peace. So grateful for a husband who treats me like a queen. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag abundance. Hashtag positive vibes only." I zoomed in on the photo. She was wearing the diamond earrings I had admired in a magazine years ago but could never afford. In the background, Kyle was lounging on a pool chair laughing at something on his phone. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought I had gone back to my hole to cry and accept my defeat. They thought my threat was empty because in their minds, I was still the little girl who was afraid to speak up at the dinner table. They were wrong. I was not crying. I was building a war room. I took the last $5,000 I had to my name money I had saved for a down payment on a reliable car, and I hired the best team in Atlanta. I did not go to a strip mall lawyer. I went to the Glass and Steel Tower in Midtown. I sat across the desk from Marcus, a private investigator who used to work for the FBI. He was a large man with eyes that missed nothing and a silence that invited you to tell him your darkest secrets. I want to know everything, I told him. I want to know where they go, who they talk to, and exactly how they are spending my money. I want to know what Kyle does when Tasha is not around. I want to know if my father is really retired or if he is hiding assets. Marcus nodded and took the file. "Give me a week," he said. Next, I went to see Evelyn. She was a tax attorney with a reputation for being a shark. She wore sharp suits and had a mind like a steel trap. When I showed her the bank records Simone had pulled, Evelyn did not gasp. She did not look shocked. She smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who just spotted a wounded deer. "This is sloppy," she said, tapping a long manicured nail on the spreadsheet. "Your brother-in-law thinks he is a financial genius because he knows some buzzwords about cryptocurrency, but he left a trail a mile wide." "What do you mean?" I asked. Evelyn pulled up a document on her computer. "I ran a preliminary check on K&T Holdings. They filed a tax return last year. Do you want to know how much income they declared?" "Zero, I guessed." "Zero," she confirmed. "But here is the kicker. To explain the influx of cash into their personal accounts so they could buy the cars and the boat without triggering an audit, they had to classify the money as something. You cannot just have millions appear in your account without the IRS asking questions. So Kyle got creative. He filed a gift tax return. A gift, I asked, leaning forward. "Yes," Evelyn said. "He claimed the $5.8 million was a lifetime gift from your grandmother Hattie. He forged a gift letter. He claimed it was a non-taxable transfer of generational wealth." I felt the blood pound in my ears. He didn't just steal from me. He lied to the federal government. He used my grandmother's name to launder stolen money. "That is tax evasion," I said. "That is more than tax evasion," Evelyn corrected. "That is wire fraud. That is identity theft. That is filing false documents with the IRS." If we report this to the Criminal Investigation Division, he is looking at 10 years in federal prison minimum. And since your parents signed off on the transfers as trustees, they are accessories. They go down too. I sat back in the leather chair and looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. I thought about Tasha's Instagram post. Toxic negative energy. That is what she called me. I thought about my father lecturing me about being a good steward. I thought about my mother telling me to fix my lipstick while she stole my future. They were partying at the Ritz-Carlton, spending the last of my inheritance, while I sat here deciding their fate. Evelyn watched me closely. "You have a choice, Amara," she said softly. "We can go the criminal route. We can hand this over to the feds. They will raid the house. They will arrest everyone. Kyle will go to prison. But the government will seize the assets. The cars, the boat, the house. It will all go into federal forfeiture. You might get some restitution eventually, but it will take years and the lawyers will eat up most of it. You will get justice, but you will be broke." She paused, letting the reality sink in. Or she continued, "We can use this. We can use the threat of prison to strip them clean. We can force them to sign over everything. We can leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. But they stay out of jail." I closed my eyes. I imagined Kyle in an orange jumpsuit. It was a pleasing image. But then I imagined him coming out in a few years claiming he was a victim writing a book about his persecution. I imagined Tasha playing the waiting wife, garnering sympathy. No prison was too easy for them. Prison provided 3 meals a day. Prison provided a roof. I wanted them to feel what I had felt. I wanted them to feel the panic of an empty bank account. I wanted them to feel the shame of eviction. I wanted them to know what it was like to be homeless and hopeless. I opened my eyes. I looked at Evelyn. "I don't want to choose," I said, my voice steady. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I want both," I said. "I want the money. I want the assets. I want my parents' house. I want Tasha's jewelry. I want Kyle's car. I want every single dime they have hidden. And once I have everything, once they are sleeping on the street, then I want the handcuffs." Evelyn smiled again. "That is cold, Amara," she said. "They taught me well," I replied. But first I continued, "We need leverage. Kyle is arrogant. He thinks he is untouchable. If we just threaten him, he will laugh. He will think I am bluffing again. We need to own him. We need to hold the leash." Marcus, the investigator, walked into the office at that exact moment. He was holding a large manila envelope. "I think I found your leash," he said, tossing the envelope onto the desk. I opened it. Inside were photographs. High-resolution photographs taken with a long-range lens. They showed Kyle. But he wasn't with Tasha. He was in the parking lot of an underground gambling den in East Atlanta. He was shaking hands with a man who looked like he broke kneecaps for a living. And in the next photo, Kyle was handing over a set of keys. "He is in deep," Marcus said. "He didn't just lose your money on bad crypto trades, Amara. He lost it on poker and sports betting. And he is chasing his losses. He owes money to some very bad people. That is why he is desperate for cash. That is why he needs to refinance the house." I looked at the photo of Kyle looking sweaty and terrified. He pawned his watch, Marcus added, pointing to a zoomed-in shot. "And last week he took a loan against the title of your sister's Mercedes. She doesn't know." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the crack in the armor. Kyle wasn't just a thief. He was a desperate addict, drowning in debt and lies. "Evelyn," I said, looking up at my attorney, "how fast can we buy that debt?" "Buy the gambling debt?" she asked, surprised. "No," I said. "The legitimate debt. The mortgage on my parents' house. The loan on Tasha's spa. If he is in this deep, he has missed payments. He is delinquent." Evelyn typed rapidly on her keyboard. "I can check. Yes, here it is. The mortgage on the Buckhead estate is 90 days past due. The bank is getting ready to issue a notice of default." Buy it, I said. Amara, that will cost you everything you have left, and we will have to leverage your future earnings, she warned. Buy it, I repeated. Set up a shell company. Call it Phoenix Rising. Buy the mortgage note from the bank. I don't want the bank to foreclose on them. I want to be the one to do it. Evelyn nodded slowly, respecting the strategy. You want to be their landlord? No, I said, standing up and gathering my purse. I want to be their executioner. I walked out of the office into the bright Atlanta sun. I checked my phone. Another notification from Instagram. Tasha had posted a video of them clinking glasses at dinner. To family, she had captioned it. I liked the video. It was the first interaction I had made in weeks. Enjoy the champagne, Tasha, I whispered to the screen. It is the last expensive drink you will ever have. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. And with the birthday party of the century coming up, I knew exactly when to spring it. The office of the Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending at Atlanta First National was cold and smelled of stale coffee and aggressive air conditioning. I sat in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, wearing a black blazer that made me feel like an executioner. Beside me, Evelyn was arranging a stack of documents with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Across the desk sat Mr. Henderson, a man with a comb-over and a nervous tick in his left eye. He looked tired. Dealing with bad debt usually made people tired, but today he looked particularly exhausted. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and tapped the thick file in front of him. Miss Jenkins. He began, his voice carrying a note of hesitation. I must admit this is a highly unusual request. Usually when we sell off a distressed mortgage note, it is to a large collection agency or a hedge fund. We rarely sell a single residential note to a private LLC, especially one formed only 48 hours ago. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany desk. I clasped my hands together and looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I channeled every ounce of the corporate shark persona I had honed over 6 years of battling in boardrooms. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice smooth and low. Unusual does not mean illegal, and it certainly does not mean unprofitable. You are holding a non-performing asset. The borrowers on the property at Mockingbird Lane have missed 3 consecutive payments. They have ignored your notices of default. They have taken out a second lien on the property with a predatory lender to fund high-risk cryptocurrency speculation. This loan is radioactive. You know it and I know it. Mr. Henderson flinched slightly at the mention of the cryptocurrency. It was the dirty little secret in the file. Kyle had not just stopped paying the mortgage. He had used the equity in the house, the equity that my money had paid for, to take out a high-interest cash loan. He had bet the roof over my parents' heads on a digital coin that had crashed 90% in the last month. He was not just underwater. He was anchored to the bottom of the ocean. I continued, pressing my advantage. If you keep this note, you will have to initiate foreclosure proceedings. That will take months. You will have to deal with eviction. You will have to pay for maintenance while the house sits empty. You will have to pay legal fees. Or, you can sell the note to my company Nemesis LLC right now. I will pay you the full principal balance plus interest. You get the bad debt off your books before the end of the quarter and you look like a hero to your board. Mr. Henderson looked at the check lying on the desk. It was a cashier's check. The money came from the liquidation of my own retirement accounts and a high-interest bridge loan I had secured using my future earnings as collateral. It was a gamble. A massive, dangerous gamble. If this went wrong, I would be destitute. But I wasn't betting on the housing market. I was betting on my family's incompetence, and that was the surest bet in the world. Who are the principals of Nemesis LLC? Mr. Henderson asked, picking up his pen. The bank needs to know who we are assigning the mortgage to. I pointed to the articles of incorporation. The principal is a blind trust, I said, represented by my counsel here. We value our privacy. Mr. Henderson hesitated for one more second, and then the allure of solving his problem overcame his curiosity. He picked up the pen and signed. He signed the assignment of mortgage. He signed the transfer of the note. He stamped the papers with the official bank seal. With those strokes of ink, the power dynamic of my entire life shifted. For 32 years, Carl and Vivian Jenkins had held the power. They held the approval I craved. They held the keys to the home I wasn't allowed to live in. They held the narrative of who I was. But as Mr. Henderson slid the signed folder across the desk, all of that vanished. I picked up the folder. It felt heavy. It felt electric. "Thank you for your business," I said, standing up. Evelyn walked out with me, her heels clicking rapidly on the tile floor. Once we were in the elevator, she let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 20 minutes. "You are crazy, Amara," she said, shaking her head but smiling. "You are absolutely clinically insane. You just leveraged your entire financial future to buy a toxic loan." "I am not buying a loan, Evelyn," I said, watching the floor numbers count down. "I am buying leverage. I am buying the right to stand on that front porch and tell them to get out. I am buying the look on Kyle's face when he realizes his clever little bankruptcy scheme won't save him because his creditor isn't a faceless bank anymore. It is me." We walked out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from Marcus, my private investigator. He had set up a digital alert for any activity on Kyle's social media. I opened the app. Kyle had posted a story on Instagram just 10 minutes ago. He was sitting in the driver's seat of the Porsche, which I now knew was also months behind on payments. He was holding a letter from the bank, the notification that his loan had been sold. The caption read, "God is good. The bank sold our mortgage to some random investment company. That means the foreclosure clock resets. Bought us another 6 months at least. The universe always provides for the faithful. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag crypto king. Hashtag untouchable." I stared at the screen and a laugh bubbled up in my chest. It was a dark, hollow sound. Kyle thought he had been saved. He thought the bureaucratic shuffle of paperwork was a divine intervention. He thought he had bought time. He had no idea that he hadn't bought time. He had just been sold to the butcher. I texted Marcus back. "We have the note. Phase 2 is complete. What is his current location?" Marcus replied instantly. "He is at the country club, meeting with some potential investors. He is trying to raise capital for a new venture, something about NFTs. "Excellent," I typed. "Let him enjoy his lunch. Let him feel safe." I drove back to my small apartment, but the space didn't feel cramped anymore. It felt like a command center. I placed the mortgage documents on my kitchen table next to the evidence of the fraud. The pieces were coming together. I had the proof of the theft. I had the ownership of their debt. I was no longer just the victim. I was the bank. I was the landlord. I was the judge and the jury. That night I sat on my balcony drinking a glass of cheap wine and looking toward Buckhead. I imagined them in that house. I imagined my mother cooking dinner in the kitchen I paid for. I imagined my father sitting in the recliner watching TV under the roof I owned. I imagined Tasha playing with her baby in the nursery that was funded by my student loans. They were sleeping inside the belly of the beast, and they didn't even know it. I pulled out my laptop and opened the email account for Nemesis LLC. It was time to introduce myself, not as Amara the daughter, but as Nemesis the entity. I drafted a formal letter. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Kyle Davis, please be advised that the mortgage on the property located at 450 Mockingbird Lane has been assigned to Nemesis LLC effective immediately. Our records indicate that you are 90 days in arrears. This letter serves as your formal notice. You have 30 days to cure the default and pay the full balance of the arrears, including all late fees and penalties. Failure to do so will result in the immediate acceleration of the loan and the commencement of foreclosure proceedings. We do not offer payment plans. We do not offer forbearance. We expect payment in full." I read the letter twice. It was cold. It was professional. It was terrifying. I hit send. Somewhere in the darkness of the city, a notification would pop up on Kyle's phone. He would probably ignore it, thinking it was spam. Or he would read it and laugh, thinking he could charm his way out of it like he did with everything else. But he couldn't charm Nemesis. I finished my wine. The air tasted sweeter tonight. It tasted like justice. The trap was not just set, the jaws were beginning to close. The trap was not a cage made of steel bars, but a leather booth in the back of the exclusive Commerce Club in downtown Atlanta. I knew Kyle's psychology better than he knew himself. He was a man who believed the world owed him a fortune. He believed he was one lucky break away from being Elon Musk. He didn't understand hard work, he only understood shortcuts. And the thing about people who look for shortcuts is that they never look down to see the pit they are about to step into. I recruited Julian for the role of the angel investor. Julian was an old friend from business school, a man who had made a legitimate fortune in fintech and had zero tolerance for frauds like Kyle. He owed me a favor from a merger deal I helped him navigate 2 years ago. When I explained the situation to him, when I showed him the forged signatures and the stolen trust fund, Julian didn't just agree to help, he asked for the privilege of destroying Kyle himself. We set the stage perfectly. Julian sent word through a mutual acquaintance that he was looking for early-stage investors for a revolutionary new blockchain project called Quantum Ledger. We knew Kyle would bite. The moment he heard the words blockchain and early access, he was like a shark smelling blood in the water. He didn't care about the technology. He only cared that he could get in early and dump it on someone else for a profit. I sat in a black SUV parked across the street, listening to the audio feed from the microphone taped to the underside of the table. I watched Kyle walk into the club. He was wearing a navy suit that was slightly too tight, and he had slicked his hair back in an attempt to look like a Wall Street titan. But even from this distance, I could see the nervous energy radiating off him. He walked with the hurried step of a man who knows his time is running out. Inside the club, Julian played his part to perfection. He didn't offer the deal to Kyle immediately. He made Kyle work for it. I don't know if this is the right fit for you, Kyle, Julian said, his voice smooth and disinterested, coming through my earpiece. This is a high liquidity play. We are moving fast. The buy-in is $500,000 cash. I heard you have had some liquidity issues with the market downturn. I heard Kyle scoff. It was a wet, desperate sound. Liquidity issues? Kyle laughed nervously. That is just gossip. My family is extremely well capitalized. My wife comes from the Jenkins textile money. We have millions in liquid assets. We are just restructuring some portfolios right now to optimize for tax purposes. You know how it is. I gripped the steering wheel. He was still using my grandmother's name. He was still using the ghost of the money he had already stolen and spent to con his way into new deals. Julian paused. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. I could imagine Kyle sweating. The thing is, Julian finally said, I have a line of investors waiting. I have guys from New York blowing up my phone. I met you because I like your energy. You remind me of myself when I was starting out. Hungry. But I need skin in the game. If I am going to let you in on the ground floor, I need to know you are serious. Can you wire the $500,000 by Friday? Kyle hesitated. I knew exactly what was going through his head. He didn't have $500,000. He didn't have $500. He was currently hiding from his mortgage lender. But the greed was louder than the fear. He saw a chance to make $5 million and fix everything. I can make the wire happen, Kyle lied. But since my assets are tied up in the restructuring, it might take a week to clear. Can we do a bridge agreement? I can sign a promissory note. Julian sighed, the sound of a man losing patience. I don't do promissory notes, Kyle. I am not a bank, but I tell you what, since I like you, I can front you the buy-in. But I need collateral, hard assets. Something I can hold until the wire clears, just to keep the lawyers happy. Collateral. Kyle asked, his voice shaking slightly. Yeah, Julian said. Real estate, vehicles, equity. What do you have personally in your name? There was a rustling of papers. Kyle was trapped. He couldn't offer the house because he knew the bank and now Nemesis LLC held the lien. He had to offer the only things he had left. I have a Porsche Cayenne Turbo, Kyle said. Fully paid off. Title in hand. And I have a 50% equity stake in my wife's business, Tasha's Day Spa. It is a premier location in Buckhead, generates consistent cash flow. I almost laughed out loud in the car. The Porsche was bought with stolen money. The spa was built with stolen money. And now he was gambling them away on a fake deal. That might work, Julian said, sounding unimpressed. What is the valuation on the spa? Conservatively, Kyle said, his voice gaining confidence. 600,000. Okay, Julian said. Here's the deal. You sign a secured pledge agreement. You pledge the car and the business equity as collateral for a $500,000 loan from my holding company. If you wire the cash by next Friday, the agreement is voided. If you don't, I take the car and the business. Simple. I held my breath. This was the moment. If he signed this, he was giving me the keys to the last pieces of his life. He was giving me Tasha's business. He was leaving them completely naked. Where do I sign? Kyle asked. I heard the scratch of a heavy fountain pen on paper. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. He didn't even read the terms. He didn't notice that the holding company listed on the contract was a subsidiary of Phoenix Rising, which was a subsidiary of Nemesis LLC. He was too blinded by the dollar signs in his eyes. Done, Julian said. Welcome to the future, Kyle. I will have my team send over the prospectus. I heard the chair scrape back. Keep the pen, Julian added. A gift. Thanks, man, Kyle said. You won't regret this. Kyle walked out of the club 2 minutes later. He looked like he was walking on air. He pulled out his phone before the valet even brought his car around. I watched him dial. Hey, babe, he shouted into the phone, not caring who heard him. It is done. I closed the deal. I waited for Tasha to answer. We are going to be rich, Tash, he said, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. This guy, Julian, he is the real deal. I got us into the Quantum Ledger pre-sale. This token is going to do 100 times in the first month. We are talking $50 million easy. He paused, listening to Tasha. No, I didn't have to put up cash. He lied smoothly. I just leveraged my reputation. These guys know who the Jenkins family is. He laughed then, and it was a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was the sound of pure malice. You know what is funny? He said, lowering his voice slightly, but I could still hear every word. Your sister, Amara, walking around with her cheap clothes thinking she is so smart with her little threats. If she hadn't been so stupid and let us handle that trust fund, none of this would be possible. Her money was the seed capital for all of this. He looked up at the sky, smiling. She is like the goose that laid the golden egg, Tasha. Only she is too dumb to know she is the goose. She is our blessing, babe, a stupid, ugly blessing. But hey, we will send her a postcard from our yacht in the Mediterranean. He hung up the phone just as the valet pulled up in the Porsche. He tipped the guy with a $20 bill he probably needed for gas. I watched him drive away, the engine of the Porsche roaring down the street. It was the last time he would drive it with a smile on his face. I reached up and pulled the earpiece out. My hands were steady. My heart was slow. He called me stupid. He called me ugly. He called me a goose. But he forgot one thing about the story of the golden goose. In the end, the farmer gets greedy and kills the goose and finds nothing inside. But in this version, the goose was alive, and the goose was the one holding the knife. I picked up my phone and called Julian. Did you get the signature? I asked. Ink is still wet, Julian replied. I am couriering the original to your lawyer right now. You own the car, Amara, and you own half the spa. Thank you, Julian, I said. My pleasure, he said. He really is as dumb as you said. I hung up and started my engine. I had the mortgage, I had the car, I had the business. They had nothing left but the illusion of wealth. And the birthday party was only 3 days away. I drove home planning my outfit. I decided on red, the color of warning, the color of blood, the color of victory. It was time to crash the party. 3 months of silence is a lifetime in the world of the Jenkins family. For 90 days, I had been a ghost. I ignored their birthdays. I ignored the passive-aggressive texts from my aunts asking why I was being so difficult. I ignored the fake emergency calls from my mother claiming she was having palpitations. In the silence, I found peace, but I also found clarity. I used that time to sharpen my blade. While they were scrambling to keep up appearances, I was quietly buying every debt they owed. I owned the mortgage on the house. I owned the loan on the Porsche. I owned the lien on the spa. I was the invisible hand tightening around their throats, and they didn't even know I was in the room. Then came the invitation. It didn't come by text or email. It arrived via a private courier in a heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. I held it in my hand, feeling the texture of the expensive paper. It must have cost $10 just to print this one invite. I broke the seal and pulled out the card. You are cordially invited to the 30th wedding anniversary renewal of vows for Carl and Vivian Jenkins. The theme was diamonds and pearls. The location was the estate on Mockingbird Lane, my house. I stared at the invitation and laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. They were throwing a lavish party to celebrate a marriage built on lies in a house that was technically in foreclosure proceedings, even though I hadn't served the final papers yet. They were spending money they didn't have to impress people who didn't care about them. It was the perfect metaphor for their entire existence. A smaller note fell out of the envelope. It was handwritten by my mother. Amara, please come. We miss you. Let us put the past behind us. We have a surprise for you. Love, Mom. I knew exactly what the surprise was. Marcus, my private investigator, had intercepted an email from Kyle to a new lender. The blockchain scam had fallen through, or rather he was waiting for the payout that would never come, and he was desperate for cash to cover his gambling debts. He was trying to secure a massive consolidation loan to pay off the sharks. But the new bank was suspicious. They had seen the flags on the credit report regarding the trust fund dispute. They needed proof that there was no pending litigation. They needed a statement from the alleged victim stating that the funds were a gift and not stolen. They didn't want to reconcile. They wanted a signature. They wanted me to sign an affidavit, clearing them of fraud so they could dig themselves into an even deeper hole. I called Evelyn. They invited me, I said, staring at the gold script on the card. I know, Evelyn replied, her voice crisp and professional. Kyle's lawyer sent over a draft document this morning. It is a waiver of liability. If you sign it, you forfeit your right to sue for the trust fund. They are going to corner you at the party. They think the social pressure of the event will make you comply. They think you won't want to cause a scene in front of the pastor and the country club set. I walked over to my closet. I pushed aside the gray blazers and the sensible slacks I wore to my corporate job. In the back, still wrapped in plastic, was a dress I had bought specifically for this moment. It was not white, it was not cream. It was blood red, a deep crimson silk that looked like liquid fire. Tell the team to get ready, I told Evelyn. We are not just serving them papers. We are ending the charade. I am ready, Evelyn said. The IRS agents are briefed. The foreclosure officers are on standby. We just need your signal. I spent the afternoon of the party getting ready with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle. I hired a professional makeup artist. I wanted to look untouchable. I wanted to look like money. Real money. Not the leveraged credit card debt money my family flaunted, but the kind of money that owns the bank. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the shy girl who used to hide in the library. I saw Nemesis. I ordered a luxury black car service. I wasn't going to drive my Honda tonight. As the car rolled through the iron gates of the estate, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The house was lit up like a palace. Valets were running back and forth, parking Bentleys and Mercedes. A string quartet was playing on the lawn. It was beautiful, and it was all mine. I stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the scent of gardenias and expensive perfume. I walked up the stone steps, the red silk of my dress flowing around me like a warning flag. The conversation stopped as I entered the foyer. Heads turned. I saw my Aunt Verna drop her jaw. I saw the whispers ripple through the crowd. They expected the scapegoat. They expected the victim. They didn't expect the queen. My mother was the first to recover. She rushed over wearing a white lace gown that looked ridiculous on a woman of 60 trying to play the blushing bride. Amara, she breathed, reaching out to hug me but stopping short when she saw the look in my eyes. You came. You look stunning. A bit bold for the theme, but stunning. Where is he, Mom? I asked, cutting through the pleasantries. Who? She asked, feigning ignorance. Kyle and Dad. Let's get this over with. She nervously smoothed her dress. They are in the library. We just wanted a private moment before the ceremony. To talk. As a family. She led me through the crowd. I felt the eyes of the guests on me. I saw the judgment, but I also saw fear. They could sense the shift in power even if they couldn't name it. We entered the library. My father was pouring a scotch. Kyle was pacing by the window. Tasha was sitting on the leather sofa looking anxious. When I walked in, Kyle stopped pacing. He looked me up and down, and a sneer curled his lip. Nice dress, Amara, he said. Did you spend the last of your savings on it? I ignored him. I looked at my father. Mom said you wanted to talk. Carl put down his drink. He put on his best deacon face, solemn and pious. Amara, we have been praying for you, he began. We hate this distance. We are a family. And families forgive. We want to move forward. But to do that, we need to clear the air. There are rumors. Rumors that are hurting Kyle's business, hurting the family reputation. He picked up a document from the desk. We need you to sign this, he said, sliding the paper toward me. It is just a formality. It tells the banks and the lawyers that we are good, that the money was a gift, that there is no bad blood. Once you sign this, we can all go back to being a family. We can even discuss helping you with your student loans eventually. I looked at the paper. Affidavit of gift and release of claims. It was exactly what Evelyn said it would be. If I signed this, I would be admitting I lied. I would be legalizing their theft. Kyle stepped forward. Just sign it, Amara, he said, his voice losing its fake warmth. Don't ruin tonight. Grandma is out there. Do you want to break her heart? Do you want to explain to everyone why you are suing your own parents on their anniversary? They were using Grandma again. They were using guilt. They were using the audience outside as a shield. I picked up the pen. I felt the weight of it in my hand. I looked at Tasha. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at my mother, who was twisting her wedding ring. You really think this fixes everything? I asked softly. It is a start, my father said. It is the Christian thing to do, Amara. I looked down at the paper. Then I looked up and gave them the brightest, coldest smile of my life. You are right, I said. We should settle this tonight, once and for all. I didn't sign it. I folded the paper and slipped it into my clutch. I will make my decision public, I said, during the toasts. I think everyone deserves to know the truth about this family. Kyle panicked. No. We do this here quietly. I am the guest, Kyle. I said, turning to the door. And I have the floor. I walked out of the library, leaving them stunned and terrified. They didn't know if I was going to capitulate or explode. They were gambling on my fear. I walked back into the ballroom. The waiter handed me a glass of champagne. I took a sip. It was crisp and cold. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Evelyn. The target is confirmed. They tried to coerce me. Prepare the team. We strike in 10 minutes. I hit send. I watched the message deliver. Then I looked up at the stage where the microphone stood waiting. The band was playing a love song. My parents were making their grand entrance, smiling and waving to the crowd. Enjoy the applause, Mom, I thought. It is the last ovation you will ever get. The setup was complete. Now it was time for the takedown. The black sedan glided through the wrought iron gates of the estate at exactly 8 o'clock. I watched the familiar oak trees pass by through the tinted window. I had climbed those trees as a child seeking refuge from a mother who criticized my hair and a father who ignored my existence. Now the trees were wrapped in thousands of twinkling white fairy lights. It looked magical. It looked like a fairy tale. But I knew better. It was a stage set constructed on a foundation of theft and deceit. The car stopped at the foot of the grand staircase. The valet opened the door and I stepped out. The evening air was humid and thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive perfume. I took a moment to smooth the fabric of my dress. I had chosen it with the precision of a tactician. The theme of the party was diamonds and pearls, which meant every woman in attendance was wearing white cream or pale silver. They looked like a sea of obedient ghosts. I was not wearing white, I was wearing red. A deep blood-red silk gown that hugged every curve and trailed behind me like a river of fire. It was a dress that screamed danger. It was a dress that said, I am not here to blend in, I am here to burn it down. I walked up the stone steps. My heels clicked against the pavement, a rhythmic countdown to their destruction. As I reached the top of the stairs, I paused at the entrance to the grand ballroom. The double doors were open, and the room was packed with the elite of Atlanta. I saw pastors, I saw local politicians, I saw business owners. And in the center of it all, holding court like royalty, were my parents. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The reaction was immediate. It started as a ripple near the door and spread outward like a wave. The chatter died down. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the string quartet seemed to falter for a beat. All eyes turned to me. The red dress against the sea of white was a shock to the system. It was a visual act of rebellion. I held my head high. I felt the gaze of my Aunt Verna burning into my skin. I could hear her whisper to the woman next to her loud enough for me to hear. Look at her, showing up to her parents' anniversary looking like a harlot. No respect. That girl has always been a stain on this family. I turned and met Aunt Verna's eyes. I didn't scowl. I smiled. A cool, knowing smile. Keep talking, Verna, I thought. In an hour you won't be talking about my dress. You will be talking about how your brother is being led away in handcuffs. I made my way through the crowd, parting the sea of guests like Moses. I wasn't walking toward my parents. I was walking toward the champagne tower. I needed a drink before I ended their world. Well, 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 look who decided to show up. The voice was high-pitched and dripping with fake sweetness. I turned to see my sister Tasha blocking my path. She was wearing a white lace gown that probably cost $10,000. She had a tiara in her hair, a tiara. At 30 years old. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as she took in the red silk. You certainly made an entrance, Amara, Tasha said, swirling her wine. Did you not read the invitation? The theme is white. But I guess reading comprehension was never your strong suit. Or maybe you just couldn't afford a new dress and had to pull this old thing out of the back of your closet. Is it a rental? Be careful not to spill anything on it. The deposit is probably more than your rent. I looked at Tasha. I looked at the diamond necklace around her neck. I looked at the smug satisfaction on her face. She thought she was the queen of this castle. She had no idea that I held the lien on her business. She had no idea that the very ground she was standing on belonged to me. It is not a rental, Tasha, I said, my voice calm. And I wouldn't worry about my rent if I were you. You should be worrying about the interest rates on that consolidation loan Kyle is trying to get. I hear the banks are tightening up. Tasha's smile faltered. Her eyes darted to the side nervously. What do you know about that? She hissed. I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. I know more than you think, little sister. Enjoy the party. Make sure you get plenty of pictures. You will want to remember what it felt like to be rich. I brushed past her, leaving her standing there with her mouth open. But I didn't get far. A hand clamped down on my upper arm, pulling me hard to the left. "We need to talk. Now." It was Kyle. He dragged me away from the center of the room toward a small alcove near the library. His grip was tight, painful. He was sweating. Up close, the facade of the successful entrepreneur crumbled. His eyes were bloodshot. He smelled of scotch and desperation. He pushed me into the corner, blocking my exit with his body. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then he reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "You are going to sign this, Amara," he said, his voice a low growl. "Right now, before the speeches start." I looked at the paper. It was the affidavit, the lie that would save him. "I am not signing anything, Kyle," I said, pulling my arm from his grasp. "Listen to me, you little brat," Kyle snarled, leaning in close, his breath hot on my face. "You think you are smart playing these games. You think you can just ignore us. This is the real world. I have a deal closing on Monday. A big deal. But the compliance officer needs this paper. He needs you to verify that the funds were a gift." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here," he said, shoving the envelope into my hand. "There is $5,000 cash in there. 5 grand, Amara. That is like 3 months of salary for you, isn't it? Take it, sign the paper, go home. We all win. You get some spending money and we get to keep living our lives." I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at the paper. $5,000, I repeated. "You stole 5.8 million from me. You leveraged my future to buy sports cars and fake happiness. And now you want to buy my silence for $5,000. "It is a good offer," Kyle said, his eyes manic. "Don't be greedy, Amara. If you don't sign it, I go under. And if I go under, I take your sister with me. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your nephew loses his home?" The audacity was breathtaking. He was using his own child as a human shield. He was trying to monetize my empathy because he had none of his own. I looked him dead in the eye. The fear I used to feel in his presence was gone. The intimidation tactic didn't work on me anymore. I wasn't the victim in the corner. I was the wolf at the door. "Give me the paper," I said. Kyle's face lit up with relief. He practically shoved the document at me, pulling a gold pen from his pocket. "Smart girl," he said, letting out a breath. "I knew you would come to your senses. Just sign right there at the bottom." I took the paper. I held it up to the light. I pretended to read it. "I, Amara Jenkins, hereby declare that all funds transferred from the Hattie Jenkins Trust were a voluntary gift." I looked at Kyle. He was smiling, that arrogant, greasy smile. He thought he had won. He thought money could fix anything. I took the paper in both hands, and with a slow, deliberate motion, I ripped it in half. The sound of the tearing paper was soft, but to Kyle it must have sounded like a thunderclap. His smile vanished. His eyes bulged. "What are you doing?" he whispered. I put the two halves together and ripped them again, and again, until the legal document that would have saved his life was nothing but confetti in my hands. I let the pieces flutter to the floor, landing on his polished shoes. Then I tossed the envelope of money at his chest. It hit him with a soft thud and fell to the ground. "You keep the 5,000, Kyle," I said, my voice ice cold. "You are crazy," he stammered, his face turning purple. "You just ruined everything. Do you know what you just did?" I stepped forward, forcing him to take a step back. I reclaimed my space. "I know exactly what I did," I said. "And as for the money, you should pick it up. You are going to need it." "Need it for what?" Kyle asked, his voice trembling with rage. I leaned in close so only he could hear the verdict. "You are going to need it to buy ramen noodles," I whispered. "I hear the commissary in federal prison is getting expensive these days." I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't look back. I heard him sputtering behind me. I heard him calling my name, but he didn't follow. He was paralyzed by the truth. I walked back into the ballroom. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. I saw my lawyer Evelyn standing near the bandstand. She gave me a subtle nod. The team was in position. I smoothed my red dress. The lion's den wasn't so scary once you realized you were the one holding the whip. I checked my watch. 5 minutes until the speeches. 5 minutes until the end of the Jenkins family legacy. I grabbed another glass of champagne. It was time for the show. The band slowed to a soft instrumental version of a classic love song as the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center of the stage where my father Carl stood holding a microphone. Beside him, my mother Vivian struck a pose that she had likely practiced in the mirror for hours. She tilted her head just so, catching the light on her diamond earrings. They looked the part perfectly. The devoted patriarch and the supportive matriarch, the pillars of the community standing tall in the house they claimed was the fruit of their labor. I stood in the shadows near a marble pillar, swirling the last sip of champagne in my glass. From my vantage point, I could see everything. I could see the guests gazing up at them with admiration. I could see the local pastor nodding his head in approval. I could see the envy in the eyes of the neighbors who wondered how the Jenkins family managed to live such a charmed life. It was a masterclass in deception, a theater of the absurd funded by theft and sustained by lies. My father tapped the microphone twice, sending a dull thud through the speakers. Testing, testing, he said, his voice booming with that rich baritone he used when he was ushering at church. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. The room fell silent. My father smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 30 years, he began. 3 decades of walking in the light with this incredible woman beside me. They say marriage is hard work, but when you are building a legacy with your soulmate, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a calling. He paused for effect, letting the crowd murmur their appreciation. We have built this life on 2 things: faith and family. We have weathered storms. We have faced trials. But we have always come out stronger because we know that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It is measured in the love we share and the children we raise. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. That was rich coming from a man who had drained his daughter's trust fund to buy the very suit he was wearing. My father swept his hand toward the front table where Tasha and Kyle were sitting. And speaking of legacy, he continued, his voice swelling with pride. Look at what we have produced, our daughter Tasha. Beautiful Tasha. She has the spirit of an entrepreneur and the heart of a lioness. She has built a business from the ground up while raising our grandson. And her husband Kyle, a man of vision, a man who understands the complexities of the modern economy. We are so proud to support them, to watch them soar. They are the future of the Jenkins name. He beamed at them. Tasha wiped a fake tear from her eye. Kyle puffed out his chest, looking around the room to make sure everyone was seeing him being anointed as the golden son. There was no mention of me, no mention of Amara, no mention of the daughter who graduated top of her class, no mention of the daughter who paid the bills. In my father's narrative, I simply didn't exist. I was an inconvenience, a ghost in the machine that he had edited out of the final cut. But he forgot about the other ghost in the room. Sitting in the front row in her wheelchair was Grandma Hattie. I had arranged for her transport myself, hiring a specialized medical van to bring her from the nursing home. My parents had tried to say she was too frail to attend, but I had overruled them. Grandma was wearing her Sunday best, a purple hat with a wide brim, and she was gripping her cane with white-knuckled intensity. She had been listening to my father's speech, her face unreadable. But as he heaped praise on Kyle, the man who had gambled away her life's work, I saw her jaw tighten. My father raised his glass. So here is to family, to sacrifice, to the ones who came before us and the ones who will carry the torch, to the Jenkins legacy. Carl. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. It was the voice of a woman who had run a textile factory floor for 40 years. It was a voice of authority. My father froze. He looked down at the front row. Grandma Hattie had not raised a glass. She had raised her head. Mama, he said with a nervous chuckle. We are doing the toasts now. Hold on a second, I said. Grandma repeated louder this time. Her voice did not shake. My father's smile faltered. He looked at my mother, who was motioning frantically for the nurse to do something. But the nurse worked for me. She stood still, hands folded behind her back. "Yes, Mama," my father said, trying to keep his tone light. "What is it? Do you want to say a few words?" "I have a question," Grandma said. She didn't need a microphone. The acoustics of the room carried her words to every corner. "You talk about legacy, Carl. You talk about building this life. You talk about sacrifice." She pointed her cane at the floor. A sharp, accusatory gesture. "So tell me something, son. Whose name is on the deed to this house?" The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. The guests looked at each other confused. Was this part of the speech? Was this a senile outburst? My father's face turned a shade of gray that matched the curtains. He gripped the microphone so hard his knuckles turned white. "Mama, you are confused," he said, his voice tight. "We can talk about paperwork later. This is a party. Let's not bore the guests with details." "I am not confused," Grandma snapped. "I might be old, Carl, but I am not stupid. You said you built this. You said you provided. But I look at this house and I don't see your hard work. I see my granddaughter's money." A collective gasp went through the room. My Aunt Verna dropped her fork. Tasha stood up, her face flushed with panic. "Grandma, stop it!" Tasha hissed loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "You are ruining everything. Sit down." But Grandma didn't sit down. She looked straight at my father. "Answer me, Carl," she demanded. "Who owns this house? Is it you? Or is it the girl you pretended to forget tonight?" My father looked desperate. He looked like a rat cornered in a trap. He looked at the crowd, seeing the doubt creeping into their eyes. He needed a distraction. He needed to regain control of the narrative immediately. "Music," he shouted at the band. "Play something. And let's move on to the video presentation." Yes, the video. Vivian spent weeks putting it together. A montage of our happy memories. He gestured wildly toward the massive projection screen that had been set up behind the stage. "Dim the lights," he commanded. "Watch the screen, everyone. Look at the love. Look at the truth." The band stopped playing. The spotlight on my father faded. The room plunged into near-total darkness save for the ambient glow of the exit signs. I stood by the pillar and smiled. My father had just given the command for his own execution. He thought he was queuing up a slideshow of vacations and Christmas mornings. He thought he was about to show the world the curated, perfected version of the Jenkins family. He didn't know that 3 hours ago my private investigator had swapped the HDMI cable. He didn't know that the laptop controlling the projector was currently being operated remotely by Evelyn's forensic tech team. I pulled out my phone. I typed a single character, X, and I hit send. The massive screen behind the stage flickered to life, but there was no music. There was no slide saying happy anniversary. There was just a black screen. And then a date appeared in stark white text. August 14th, 2021. My father turned to look at the screen confused. "That is not the video," he muttered. "Vivian, what did you give them?" My mother was shaking her head. "I don't know," she whispered. "That isn't my file." Then the screen went black again, and a voice filled the room. It wasn't my father's voice, and it wasn't a narrator. It was Kyle's voice. Crystal clear. High-definition audio recorded from a hidden microphone. The crowd went deadly silent. They recognized the voice. On the screen, a waveform appeared moving in sync with the audio. "I don't care if she finds out, Tasha. She is stupid. She thinks the trust fund is just for college. We can forge the signature. I already practiced it. Look." Another voice answered. It was my mother's voice. "Make the loops wider, Kyle. She writes her JS with a wide loop. If the bank calls, I will handle it. Just transfer the money to the holding company. We need the down payment for the house by Friday." My father gasped. The sound was amplified by the microphone he was still holding. "Turn it off," he screamed. "Turn it off now!" But the screen didn't turn off. It flashed white. And then an image appeared. It was a document. A high-resolution scan of a withdrawal authorization. The signature at the bottom was highlighted in red. And next to it was a side-by-side comparison of my mother's handwriting from a birthday card. They were identical. The crowd erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was a wave of shock, of horror, of realization. I stepped out from the shadows. The red dress caught the light from the screen, making me look like I was standing in the middle of the fire. "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad," I said softly. But in the silence of the room, my voice carried like a bell. My father looked at me. His eyes were wide with terror. He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a deafening screech of feedback. But the show wasn't over. The screen flickered again, and the video changed. The massive projection screen descended from the ceiling like a guillotine blade. The room was pitch black save for the exit signs and the faint glow of the expensive centerpiece candles. The air was thick with confusion. My father stood on the stage, frozen, his hands still hovering where the microphone had fallen. He looked like a statue of a man who knew his execution was imminent but was powerless to stop it. Beside him, my mother Vivian smoothed her dress nervously, her eyes darting around the room trying to find someone to blame for the technical difficulties. The guests shifted in their seats. I could hear the rustle of silk and the murmur of hushed conversations. They were expecting a montage of wedding photos set to a sentimental ballad. They were expecting pictures of my parents holding hands on the beach or cutting their wedding cake 30 years ago. They were expecting the lie to be packaged and sold to them one more time. But the screen did not show a wedding photo. It flickered to life with a harsh blue light. The image was grainy at first, a high-angle shot from a security camera mounted in the corner of a room. But as the lens focused, the location became unmistakable. It was the kitchen of the Buckhead estate, the kitchen with the marble countertops that I had paid for, the kitchen where we had eaten Thanksgiving dinners while pretending to be a happy family. A date stamp appeared in the bottom right corner in stark white numerals. August 14th, 2021. The audio crackled through the ballroom speakers loud and crisp. It was the sound of a cork popping. On the screen, Kyle walked into the frame. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, looking relaxed and smug. He was holding a bottle of Caymus wine, a $200 bottle. He poured a glass and slid it across the island to Tasha, who was sitting on a bar stool, scrolling through her phone. "Here is to the new car," Kyle said on the video, raising his glass. "The dealership just called. The Porsche is ready for pickup tomorrow." Tasha laughed. It was a high, cruel sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. "I cannot believe we pulled it off," she said, taking a sip of wine. "Do you think she will notice?" The withdrawal was huge, Kyle. $50,000. Kyle leaned against the counter, swirling his wine. "She won't notice anything," he said. "Amara is a ghost. She is too busy working her little corporate job and trying to please her boss. She never checks the statements. And even if she does, Mom and Dad are the trustees. They will just tell her it is an accounting error or a market fluctuation. She buys whatever garbage we feed her." In the ballroom, a gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the head of the church choir, cover her mouth with her hand. I saw the neighbors exchanging wide-eyed glances. This was not a rumor. This was not gossip. This was a confession recorded in high definition. But the video was not done. The scene cut. The date stamp changed to a week later. This time my mother Vivian was in the frame. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of documents in front of her. She was holding a pen, practicing something on a notepad. Kyle was standing over her shoulder, coaching her like a trainer. "No, Mom, make the loop wider," Kyle said, pointing at the paper. "Amara writes her J's with a wide loop. Like this." My mother sighed on the screen. "It is hard to do it consistently, Kyle. Are you sure the bank won't flag this?" "Vivian, look at me," Kyle said. "We are the family. We are the authorized users. Amara is just the name on the account. She is the cash cow. She exists to fund this lifestyle. Do you want to lose this house? Do you want Tasha to lose her business? Because if we don't transfer this money today, that is what happens. My mother looked at the paper, then she looked up at Kyle. And the expression on her face was not guilt. It was annoyance. It was the face of a woman who was irritated that she had to do chores. She is so stupid, my mother said. Her voice was clear, filled with venom. Amara is so stupid. I told her the market crashed and she just sat there and nodded. She didn't ask for a single report. She just wants us to love her so bad she will believe anything. It is pathetic, really. She bent down and signed the document. There, done. Transfer the funds. The ballroom erupted. It wasn't a roar of applause. It was a roar of outrage. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up. The illusion was shattered. The mask had fallen off, and underneath the pious church-going facade was a monster who called her own daughter pathetic for trusting her. I looked at the stage. My mother had collapsed onto a chair, her face buried in her hands. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she had been caught. My father was staring at the screen, his mouth open, his legacy dissolving into ash in real time. Kyle had tried to run toward the projector, likely to try and smash it, but two of the security guards I had hired stepped in his path. He stood there panting, looking like a trapped animal, his eyes darting from face to face, seeking an ally but finding none. And then the worst part played. The screen showed Tasha holding her baby, my nephew. She was bouncing him on her hip while looking at a new designer handbag. "Auntie Amara bought you this bag," Tasha cooed to the baby on the screen. "Say thank you, Auntie Amara." Oh wait, she doesn't know. Because she is a loser who lives in a shoebox while we live in a castle. The video cut to black. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. The pastor, Reverend Johnson, stood up from his table in the front row. He looked at my parents on the stage. He didn't say a word. He simply shook his head, picked up his Bible, and walked out of the room. His departure was the signal. The shame in the room was palpable. The guests felt dirty just being there. They felt complicit in the crime because they had eaten the food and drunk the wine bought with stolen money. I stepped away from the pillar. The red dress rustled softly as I moved. I walked toward the stage. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a judge entering the courtroom. The crowd parted for me. They didn't whisper this time. They stepped back, giving me a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, terrified respect. I walked up the stairs to the stage. My heels clicked on the wood. I walked past my mother, who was sobbing into her hands. I walked past my father, who couldn't even look me in the eye. I picked up the microphone from where he had dropped it. I tapped it once. The sound echoed through the room, calling everyone to attention. I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at Tasha, who was standing near the exit looking like she wanted to melt into the floor. I looked at Kyle, who was shaking with rage and fear. I raised the microphone to my lips. "I hope you enjoyed the presentation," I said, my voice steady and cool. "It is amazing what you can find when you actually look at the accounts, isn't it?" I paused, letting the words sink in. You heard them call me stupid. You heard them call me pathetic. You heard them admit to forgery, wire fraud, and theft. You heard them laugh about spending my future on cars and handbags. I turned to look at my parents. "You wanted a legacy," I said to them. "You wanted everyone to know who the Jenkins family really is. Well, now they know." I turned back to the crowd. "But don't leave yet," I said. "That video was just the appetizer. The main course is coming through those doors right now." I pointed to the double doors at the back of the room. As if on cue, the doors burst open. The bright lights from the hallway flooded into the dim ballroom. A team of 6 people walked in wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. IRS Criminal Investigation. Behind them were 2 uniformed officers from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department holding eviction notices. The room gasped again. I smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had finally balanced the ledger. "Please give a warm welcome to our special guests," I said. "They are here to help my brother-in-law with his restructuring." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. The party was over. The justice had just begun. The double doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open, they flew open with a force that rattled the crystal sconces on the walls. The sound was like a thunderclap that broke the trance of the room. Every head turned in unison. The guests were expecting maybe a waiter with a cake, or perhaps another surprise video. What they got was a squadron of 6 men and women moving with the synchronized precision of a military unit. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were not wearing party dresses. They were wearing navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering stamped across the back and chest. IRS Criminal Investigation. Behind them were 2 uniformed deputies from the Fulton County Sheriff's Department, their hands resting casually near their holsters. The air in the room shifted instantly from social awkwardness to primal fear. You could smell the panic. It smelled like sweat and expensive cologne turning sour. The lead agent was a tall woman with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at the decorations. Her eyes were locked on one target. She marched down the center aisle, her heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor, silencing the few whispers that remained. She stopped at the foot of the stage. She looked up at my father, who was still trembling, and then she looked at Kyle, who was trying to merge with the curtains. "Kyle Davis," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it projected with terrifying authority. Kyle stepped forward, his hands shaking so badly he knocked a glass of water off a side table. It shattered on the floor, but no one flinched. "Yes," he stammered. "That is me." "Is there a problem, officer? I think there has been a misunderstanding. We are just having a family celebration here." The agent didn't smile. She didn't blink. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded document. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division," she announced. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest." The words hung in the air like smoke. Arrest. Federal warrant. These were words that didn't belong in the Buckhead vocabulary. These were words for other people, for the evening news, not for the Jenkins family anniversary party. Kyle let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Arrest," he squeaked. "For what?" "Unpaid parking tickets." "Look, I can write a check right now." Agent Miller unfolded the warrant. "You are charged with 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of aggravated identity theft, and 4 counts of tax evasion. You are also charged with filing false documents with a federal agency regarding the Hattie Jenkins Trust." Kyle's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green. He looked at Tasha, who was clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes wide with horror. He looked at the guests, who were now backing away from the stage as if Kyle had a contagious disease. "This is a mistake," Kyle shouted, his voice cracking. "My lawyer said it was a gift. We have an affidavit." He looked around wildly for the paper I had torn up. The confetti pieces were still scattered on the floor where I had dropped them. "The affidavit was destroyed," Agent Miller said calmly. "And we have the forensic accounting records from the receiving bank. We traced the funds, Kyle. We know about K&T Holdings. We know about the crypto accounts in the Cayman Islands. We have everything." She motioned to the agents behind her. "Secure him." 2 of the agents moved up the stairs. The sound of their boots on the wood was heavy and ominous. Kyle saw them coming. The fight or flight instinct kicked in, and because Kyle was a coward, he chose flight. He scanned the room. The main doors were blocked. The side exit was too far. His eyes landed on the service entrance behind the stage, the door the caterers used to bring out the food. He bolted. He scrambled backward, knocking over a flower arrangement. The vase crashed, sending water and lilies everywhere. He jumped off the back of the stage, sprinting toward the kitchen door. He didn't make it 5 feet. One of the sheriff's deputies had anticipated the move. He stepped out from the shadows near the curtain and simply extended his arm. Kyle ran full speed into the deputy's chest. It was like running into a brick wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Before he could recover, the deputy spun him around and slammed him face first against the wall. "Stop resisting," the deputy barked. I am not resisting. Kyle screamed, his face pressed against the silk wallpaper. Get off me. You are hurting my shoulder. Do you know who I am? The agents swarmed him. I heard the distinct metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tight. It was a beautiful sound. It was the sound of consequences finally arriving. They hauled Kyle to his feet. His tuxedo was disheveled, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked small. He looked pathetic. And then he did exactly what I knew he would do. He looked for a scapegoat. He looked at my father, who was standing frozen on the stage. He looked at my mother, who was weeping into her hands. It wasn't my idea, Kyle screamed as the agents began to drag him toward the exit. I didn't want to do it. They made me. He twisted his body, pointing a cuffed hand at my mother. She is the one, he yelled, his voice raw with panic. Vivian. It was her idea. She is the one who practiced the signature. She told me Amara was stupid. She told me to set up the shell company. I just did what she said. I am the victim here. She is the mastermind. The ballroom went deadly silent again. This was the final nail in the coffin. The son-in-law, the golden boy, was throwing the matriarch to the wolves to save his own skin. My mother lowered her hands from her face. Her makeup was running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked at Kyle with a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Kyle, she whispered. How could you? Don't look at me like that, you witch, Kyle spat. You wanted the house. You wanted the renovation. You said Amara didn't deserve the money. You said she was just a bank account. Tell them. Tell them you forged the documents. Agent Miller looked up at the stage. Her gaze landed on my mother. Mrs. Jenkins, she said, her voice cool. We will need you to come down to the station for questioning as well. We have questions about your role as trustee. My mother swayed. Her face lost all color, turning a terrifying shade of gray. She looked at the guests. She looked at the pastor, who was staring at her with profound disappointment. She looked at Grandma Hattie, who was watching with a face of stone. And finally, she looked at me. I was standing at the foot of the stairs, my red dress glowing under the house lights. I didn't look away. I didn't offer comfort. I simply watched. Amara. My mother gasped, reaching a hand out toward me. Amara, please. Tell them. I didn't move. My mother's eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. It wasn't a theatrical faint this time. It wasn't a performance for sympathy. Her body simply gave up under the weight of the truth. She crumpled to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Vivian, my father screamed, dropping to his knees beside her. Someone call an ambulance. Help her. The room erupted into chaos. Guests were shouting. The deputies were calling for paramedics on their radios. Tasha was screaming hysterically, trying to run to her husband and her mother at the same time, but blocked by the wall of agents. I stood in the center of the storm, perfectly still. I watched the agents drag Kyle out the door, his screams of accusation fading into the night. I watched my father trying to fan my mother's face, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I felt a hand on my arm. I turned to see Evelyn, my lawyer. The foreclosure notice, she asked quietly. I looked at the scene on the stage. My mother was unconscious. My father was broken. My brother-in-law was in custody. My sister was wailing. Serve it, I said. Give it to my father. He is the only one left standing. Evelyn nodded and walked up the stairs. She waited until the paramedics arrived and stabilized my mother. Then, as they were loading her onto the stretcher, Evelyn tapped my father on the shoulder. Mr. Jenkins, she said, handing him a thick envelope. What is this? My father asked, blinking tears from his eyes. Is it medical forms? No, sir, Evelyn said. This is a notice of foreclosure and eviction. The mortgage note has been accelerated. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. My father looked at the envelope. Then he looked at me. The realization hit him. The buyer. Nemesis LLC. It was me. Amara, he whispered. You are doing this now. Tonight. I walked up the stairs until I was standing right in front of him. You took my past, Dad. I said, my voice soft but hard as diamond. I am taking your future. I turned and walked away. The sound of the sirens outside grew louder, mixing with the music that had long since stopped playing. The party was over. The house was mine. And the silence I had craved for so long finally descended not as peace, but as total and absolute victory. The red and blue lights of the police cruisers flashed through the tall windows of the ballroom, casting a rhythmic, strobing shadow over the faces of the stunned guests. The sound of the sirens faded into the distance, taking Kyle and his screaming accusations with them. The silence that remained in the room was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb crater after the explosion. My mother had been wheeled out on a stretcher, her face covered by an oxygen mask, her dynasty collapsing around her in real time. My father, Carl, stood alone on the stage. He looked small. The tuxedo that had fit him so perfectly just an hour ago now seemed to hang off his shoulders like a costume 2 sizes too big. He was staring at the empty doorway, where his wife and son-in-law had disappeared, blinking rapidly, as if trying to wake himself up from a nightmare. He looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, searching for someone to tell him that this was all a mistake, that he was still the respected deacon, the pillar of the community, the man who owned the big house on the hill. But no one looked at him. The guests were studying their shoes or whispering hurriedly to one another, clutching their purses and looking for the exits. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one, and the SS Jenkins was going down fast. I stood at the foot of the stairs, my heart beating with a slow, steady rhythm. I did not feel pity. I had spent years feeling pity for them, making excuses for them, telling myself that they were just misguided. But tonight, I felt nothing but the cool clarity of justice. I nodded to Evelyn. It was time for the final blow. Evelyn walked up the stairs. Her movements were precise and professional. She held a thick manila envelope in her hand. It was not a gift. It was an eviction. She stopped in front of my father. He looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion and a desperate sort of hope. "Is that from the hospital?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Is it about Vivian? Is she okay? Do I need to sign something for her insurance?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No, Mr. Jenkins. This is not medical. This is legal." My father frowned, wiping sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. "Legal? I don't understand. The police already took Kyle. I didn't do anything. I am just a witness. I need to go to the hospital. My wife needs me." "You can go to the hospital," Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. "But first, you need to be served." She extended the envelope toward him. He didn't take it. He stared at it as if it were a poisonous snake. "What is it?" he whispered. Evelyn took a step closer, pressing the envelope into his chest until he instinctively grabbed it. "This is a formal notice of foreclosure and acceleration of debt," she said loud enough for the people in the front row to hear. "The mortgage on this property is held by Nemesis LLC. The loan is 90 days past due. We have exercised our right to call the note due in full immediately. Since you cannot pay the balance of $2.1 million, we are initiating immediate repossession of the property." My father stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Nemesis," he stammered. "I don't know who that is. The bank sold the note. Kyle said he handled it. He said we had time. He said the new owners were an investment group." "They are an investment group," Evelyn said, stepping back to reveal me standing behind her. "And the principal investor is standing right there." My father looked past her. He looked down the stairs at me. I was bathed in the harsh light of the crystal chandelier, my red dress blazing like a warning fire. The realization hit him slowly. I could see the gears turning in his mind. Nemesis, the goddess of revenge, the daughter he had scorned. Amara, he breathed the word coming out like a curse. You are Nemesis." I walked up the stairs. I moved slowly, letting the sound of my heels on the wood echo through the silent room. I stopped until I was face to face with him. I was close enough to see the broken veins in his nose, close enough to smell the fear radiating off him. I am the bank, Dad. I said, my voice low and steady. I bought the note. I bought the debt. I own the roof over your head. I own the floor under your feet, and I am calling it in. My father's face crumbled. The arrogance, the self-righteousness, the deacon facade. It all fell away, leaving only a terrified old man. You can't do this, he said, tears welling up in his eyes. This is my home. I raised you here, your mother and I. Your mother. We are your parents. You can't just kick us out. Where are we supposed to go? Vivian is sick. She is in the hospital. You can't put us on the street. He reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back out of his reach. You raised me here, I repeated, letting a dark laugh escape my lips. You raised me here until I was 22. And then, do you remember what happened, Dad? Do you remember when I lost my first job right out of college? Do you remember when I asked if I could move back into my old room for a few months until I got back on my feet? My father looked down, avoiding my gaze. I remember I said, my voice hard as steel. You told me that my room had been turned into a guest suite for Tasha's friends. You told me that I needed to learn resilience. You told me that if I wanted to stay on the property, I could sleep in the gardening shed out back. I pointed toward the back of the estate, toward the small, dilapidated wooden structure near the fence. It had no heat. I continued, the memory fueling my anger. It had no insulation. There were rats in the walls. I slept on a cot next to the lawnmower for 3 months while you and Mom slept in a heated king-sized bed 50 yards away. You watched me shivering when I came in to use the bathroom, and you told me it built character. My father sobbed openly now, his shoulders shaking. Amara, please, that was a long time ago. We were trying to teach you. Well, I learned, I said. I learned that mercy is a luxury you didn't afford me, so I am not affording it to you. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. But where will we go? We have no money. Kyle took everything. The accounts are frozen. We have nowhere. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his problem. You could stay in the shed, I said. My father's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. The shed? Yes, we could fix it up, just for a little while, until we sort this out. Thank you, Amara. Thank you. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. Oh, wait, I said, cutting him off. I forgot. I rented the shed out last week. To a landscaping company. They store their fertilizer there. I watched the hope die in his eyes. It was brutal. It was cruel. And it was exactly what he deserved. So that leaves you with 0 options, I said. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The locks will be changed tomorrow at midnight. Whatever is left inside becomes the property of Nemesis, LLC. I suggest you start packing instead of crying. I turned my back on him. I looked out at the audience. The guests were horrified, but they weren't horrified at me. They were horrified by the truth I had exposed. They saw my father not as a victim, but as the man who had forced his own daughter to sleep with rats while he lived in luxury stolen from her. I walked down the stairs. This party is over, I announced. And then the exodus began. It started with the pastor. He didn't look at my father. He simply picked up his Bible and walked toward the exit, shaking his head. Then the neighbors followed. They placed their half-full glasses of champagne on the tables and gathered their coats. No one went up to the stage to offer condolences. No one said goodbye. They just wanted to get away from the stink of the Jenkins corruption. My father stood alone on the stage, clutching the foreclosure notice to his chest, watching his social standing evaporate. He called out names: Bill, Susan, Reverend. Wait, let me explain. But they didn't stop. They didn't turn around. The doors swung open and shut, swallowing the guests into the night until the ballroom was empty. The staff began to clear the tables. They moved efficiently, ignoring the weeping man on the stage. They worked for me now. I stood by the door, watching the final curtain fall on my father's life. He sank down onto the stage floor surrounded by the spilled water and the broken flowers. He looked small. He looked alone. He looked exactly how I had felt for 10 years. I turned to Evelyn. "Change the locks at noon," I said. "Don't give them till midnight. I don't trust them not to strip the copper out of the walls." Evelyn nodded, writing it down. "And the personal items. Put them on the curb," I said. "If they are not gone by noon, put them on the curb. Let the neighbors see exactly what happens when you steal from the wrong person." I walked out into the cool night air. The stars were shining above the Atlanta skyline. For the first time in my life, the air didn't feel heavy. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet scent of freedom. I had no parents. I had no sister. I had no family. And I had never felt more whole. The morning after the party, the sun rose over Atlanta with a cruel indifference. It was a beautiful day for everyone else, but for my sister Tasha, it was the first day of the apocalypse. She had managed to avoid the handcuffs that dragged her husband away. She had managed to avoid the stretcher that carried our mother to the hospital, but she could not avoid the reality that I had orchestrated for her. I sat in my car across the street from the Glow Day Spa in Buckhead. I sipped my black coffee and watched the inevitable unfold. Tasha pulled up in her Mercedes SUV. She was still wearing the white dress from the night before, but it was wrinkled and stained. Her hair was a mess, the tiara gone. She looked like a beauty queen who had survived a hurricane. She walked up to the glass doors of the spa, fumbling for her keys. She didn't know yet. She didn't know that the spa wasn't hers anymore. She slid the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. She jiggled it. She kicked the door. Then she saw the paper taped to the inside of the glass. It was orange. Bright neon orange. Notice of seizure. This property has been secured by Nemesis LLC pursuant to a default on the commercial lien. Access is prohibited. Tasha stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. She read the name. Nemesis LLC. She knew who that was. She spun around, scanning the parking lot, wild-eyed. She saw my Honda Civic. She saw me sitting there watching her. She didn't run away. She ran toward me. She banged on my window, her face twisted with a mix of rage and terror. "Unlock the door, Amara," she screamed, her voice muffled by the glass. "Unlock it right now. I have clients coming in an hour. This is my business. You can't do this." I rolled down the window just 2 inches. "It is not your business, Tasha," I said calmly. "It is collateral. Kyle pledged 50% of the equity to my holding company. And since he defaulted on the loan, I exercised my right to seize the assets. The other 50% is currently frozen by the federal government as proceeds of crime. So really, you own nothing. You are ruining my life," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, mixing with her smeared mascara. "I have a baby, Amara. I have a son. How am I supposed to feed him? They froze our personal accounts. The credit cards aren't working. I tried to buy diapers at the gas station and the card declined. Do you want your nephew to starve?" There it was again. The baby shield. She used that child like a get-out-of-jail-free card. I unlocked the car door. "Get in," I said. Tasha scrambled into the passenger seat. She looked at me, expecting a hug, expecting me to say I would fix it. She was the golden child after all. Whenever she made a mess, I was always the one told to clean it up. "Amara." "Please," she sobbed, grabbing my arm. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know how bad it was. Kyle told me he was handling it. He told me the money was borrowed. I am a victim too. You can't punish me for his mistakes." I pulled my arm away. I reached into the back seat and grabbed a thick binder. I dropped it onto her lap. It was heavy. "Open it," I said. Tasha opened the binder. Her hands were shaking. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the first page. "It is an invoice," I said. "Look at the date. 4 years ago." She read the line item. "Emory University, tuition and fees, spring semester, $30,000. She flipped the page. Another invoice. Fall semester, $30,000. She flipped again and again. Housing, books, sorority dues, study abroad fees in Florence. This is my college tuition, she whispered confused. Why do you have this? Mom and Dad paid this. I laughed. It was a dry sound. Mom and Dad didn't pay anything, Tasha. They told you they did. But look at the bottom of the invoice. Look at the payment source. She squinted at the fine print. Paid by Amara Jenkins. Student loan disbursement. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. You paid it. I took out $150,000 in student loans to pay for your degree. Tasha, I said. Mom and Dad said they couldn't afford it. They said if I didn't help you would have to drop out. They said I was the older sister, and it was my duty to launch you. So I did. I went into debt so you could party for 4 years. I ate instant noodles so you could go to Italy. I leaned closer to her. And what did you do with that education I bought you? You used it to help your husband set up shell companies to steal the rest of my money. Tasha shook her head violently. No, Amara? I told you I didn't know about the fraud. Stop lying, I snapped. I saw the video, Tasha. The whole world saw the video. I saw you holding that glass of wine laughing about how stupid I was. You were an accomplice. You were right there in the room when the forgery happened. Tasha shrank back against the door. I called the prosecutor this morning, I continued. They are very interested in that video. They are considering adding you to the indictment. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. That carries a 5-year minimum sentence. Tasha let out a strangled sound of panic. Please, Amara, no. I can't go to prison. Who will raise my son? I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had never heard the word no in her entire life. I looked at the sister who had mocked my clothes and my car while spending my money. I am willing to make a deal, I said. Tasha grabbed my hand again. Anything. I will do anything. I pointed to the binder. The total is $120,000 plus interest, I said. That is the debt I carried for you. I want it back, every single penny. I don't have that kind of money, she cried. You took the spa. You took the house. I have nothing. You have a closet full of Birkin bags, I said. You have a jewelry box full of diamonds. You have a closet full of designer shoes. Sell them. But those are my things, she whispered, clutching her purse. Not anymore, I said. They are assets. Liquidate them. And, Tasha? I added, my voice dropping to a whisper. I don't want you to just sell your stuff. I want you to work. You have a degree in business, don't you? It is time you used it. I handed her a piece of paper. It was a job application. The Waffle House on Piedmont Road is hiring, I said. I know the manager. I put in a good word for you. Tasha stared at the application with horror. You want me to be a waitress. I want you to learn the value of $1, I said. A real dollar, not a stolen one. Here is the deal, Tasha. You sign a confession admitting your role in the fraud. I will hold on to it. If you pay me back the $120,000, I will keep that confession in my safe. I won't give it to the prosecutor. You stay out of prison. You get to raise your son. But if you miss a payment, if you try to run, if you try to hide assets, I hand this over to Agent Miller and you join your husband in a cell. Do we have an agreement? Tasha looked at the spa she could no longer enter. She looked at the luxury car she would probably have to surrender tomorrow. She looked at the bleak reality of her future. She realized that the golden child was dead. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed the confession. Good, I said, taking the paper. Now get out of my car. You have a shift starting at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. They dock your tips if you are late. Tasha opened the door. She stepped out onto the pavement. She looked lost. She looked broken. Amara, she said quietly, how am I supposed to survive? I started the engine. You figure it out, Tasha, I said, just like I did. I watched in the rearview mirror as she stood there alone. The transformation had begun. Over the next few weeks, Atlanta witnessed the spectacular fall of Tasha Jenkins. It was the talk of the town. The woman who used to look down on everyone from her VIP booth was now seen dragging garbage bags full of designer clothes into consignment shops. She sold the Birkins. She sold the Louboutins. She sold the tiaras. She cried every time she handed over a purse, but she did it because she knew I was watching. She moved out of the Buckhead mansion 2 hours before the sheriff arrived to lock it up. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she used to make fun of. And then came the moment that made it all worth it. 1 month later, I walked into the Waffle House on Piedmont Road. It was busy. The smell of grease and coffee filled the air. I sat in a booth near the window. A waitress walked over. She was wearing a yellow uniform with a name tag that was crooked. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She had dark circles under her eyes. "Can I get you some coffee, hon?" she asked without looking up, pulling a pad from her apron. "Hello, Tasha," I said. She froze. She looked up. Her eyes filled with shame. "Amara," she whispered. "Please, don't do this here." "I'm just a customer, Tasha," I said, smiling. "I would like the All-Star Special, and keep the coffee coming." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am." She walked away to put in the order. I watched her wipe down a dirty table. I watched her get yelled at by a truck driver because his eggs were cold. I watched her struggle to carry a heavy tray of dishes. For the first time in her life, she was earning her keep. When she brought my food, she placed the check on the table. "Thank you, Tasha," I said, placing a $100 bill on the table. "Keep the change. Put it toward the debt." She looked at the money. A month ago, she would have spent this on a salad. Now it was a lifeline. "Thank you, Amara," she said softly. I ate my breakfast watching my sister serve the world she thought she was better than. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just a woman trying to survive the wreckage of her own entitlement. And strangely enough, she looked more human in that yellow uniform than she ever did in silk. Justice, I realized, didn't always look like a gavel banging. Sometimes it looked like a plate of waffles served by a humble hand. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime revealing the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. For the first time in weeks, the city didn't look like a battlefield to me. It looked like a painting. I wheeled Grandma Hattie out of the elevator and into the foyer of our new penthouse. This was not the stuffy, over-decorated mansion my parents had stolen. This was modern, light, and breathable. The floors were white oak, the walls were glass, and the air smelled of fresh lilies and freedom. I had bought this place 2 days after the foreclosure was finalized. I used the money I recovered from the sale of Kyle's assets and the settlement from the bank. It was expensive, but it was necessary. I needed a fortress, a place where the toxicity of the Jenkins family could not reach us. I pushed Grandma's wheelchair into the living room. She was quiet, looking around with sharp, observant eyes. My parents had told everyone that Grandma was senile, that her mind was going, and she needed constant supervision. That was just another lie they told to control her and her checkbook. Since I brought her home from the nursing home, she had been lucid, sharp, and full of a quiet, simmering rage. I parked her chair by the window where she could see the sunset turning the clouds to gold. I went to the kitchen and made us tea. Not the cheap tea bags my mother used to serve her, but real loose-leaf Earl Grey served in delicate porcelain cups. I brought the tray over and sat on the sofa facing her. "Is it to your liking, Grandma?" I asked, pouring her a cup. She took a sip and nodded. "It is perfect, Amara. It tastes like peace." We sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't the awkward silence of the dinner party. It was the comfortable silence of two soldiers who had survived the same war. Grandma set her cup down. Her hand shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "You are wondering why I let it go on so long," she said. I looked at her, surprised. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to upset her. "I am wondering how you knew," I admitted. "You were in the nursing home. They told me you were too sick to have visitors. They blocked my calls." Grandma let out a dry laugh. "They blocked your calls, Amara, but they couldn't block my lawyers. I have had eyes on those accounts since the day I set them up. I got a notification every time your mother forged a signature." I got a notification every time Kyle transferred money to that shell company. I stared at her shocked. You knew. You knew for 4 years and you didn't stop them. Why? Grandma looked out the window at the city below. Because I needed you to see them, she said softly. I needed you to see them without the filter of a daughter's love. She turned to look at me, her eyes full of a fierce protective love. Amara, you have always been the kindest soul in this family. You are loyal to a fault. You forgave them when they forgot your birthday. You forgave them when they made you sleep in the shed. You forgave them when they forced you to pay for your sister's college. You have a heart that wants to believe the best in people, especially your blood. She reached out and took my hand. If I had intervened 4 years ago, if I had stopped the first fraudulent transfer, you would have defended them. You would have said it was a mistake. You would have let them talk their way back into your life. You would have spent the next 20 years letting them drain you slowly. $1,000 here, a car payment there. They would have bled you dry, Amara, and you would have let them because you thought it was your duty. I felt tears prick my eyes. She was right. Even after the dinner party, part of me had wanted to accept their apology. Part of me had wanted to believe they could change. I needed a nuclear event, Grandma continued. I needed them to do something so unforgivable, so undeniable, that you would have no choice but to cut the cord. I used that trust fund as bait. I let them hang themselves with their own greed. I knew $5.8 million was enough to make them reckless. I knew they couldn't resist. But Grandma, I whispered, that was your money, your life's work. You let them steal it just to teach me a lesson. Grandma smiled. A mischievous glint appeared in her eye. Amara, do you really think I put all my eggs in one basket? Do you think I built a textile empire by being careless with my capital? She reached into the side pocket of her wheelchair and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. It looked old and worn, smelling of tobacco and history. The $5.8 million was the liquid cash, she said, placing the portfolio in my lap. It was the decoy. It was the money I kept in the checking accounts for day-to-day operations. I knew they would go for it because it was easy access. She gestured to the portfolio. Open it. I undid the leather strap and opened the heavy cover. Inside were documents on thick watermarked paper. The Hattie Jenkins Dynasty Trust. I scanned the pages. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a bank account. This was a diversified portfolio of commercial real estate patents, municipal bonds, and blue-chip stocks. I saw the valuation on the bottom of the first page. $42 million. I looked up at Grandma, unable to speak. This, she said, tapping the paper. This is the real legacy. This is the money your grandfather and I made from the patents on the synthetic fibers we developed in the 60s. Your father doesn't know about this. Your mother doesn't know. They were too busy spending the cash to ask where the real wealth came from. I shook my head, the numbers swimming before my eyes. 42 million. And it is protected, Grandma said. It is in an irrevocable trust. No one can touch it. No trustee can drain it. Except for the beneficiary. She looked me dead in the eye. You, Amara, you are the sole beneficiary. Me, I whispered. But what about Dad? What about Tasha? Grandma hardened her expression. They made their choice. They chose the quick cash. They chose the theft. They chose to betray their own blood for a Porsche and a trip to the Maldives. They failed the test, Amara. You passed. She leaned back in her chair, looking tired but satisfied. I watched you for years. I watched you work 2 jobs while Tasha partied. I watched you drive that beat-up Honda while Kyle drove a Mercedes. I watched you build a career on your own merit. You have the one thing they lack: character. You know the value of $1 because you earned it. You know the value of family because you had to mourn the loss of one. She pointed to the portfolio. That money is yours, not to spend on handbags, but to build, to invest, to change the world if you want to. You are the matriarch now, Amara. The Jenkins line continues with you. The rest of them are just branches that needed to be pruned so the tree could survive. I closed the portfolio. The weight of it was heavy on my lap, but it was a good weight. It felt like responsibility. It felt like trust. I don't know what to say, Grandma. Don't say anything, she said, closing her eyes. Just promise me one thing, anything. Promise me you will never let them back in. When they find out about this, and they will find out, they will come crawling back. They will beg. They will use the Bible. They will use memories. They will use guilt. I looked at the strong woman sitting before me, the woman who had sacrificed a fortune just to save my soul. I promise, I said, my voice firm. The locks are changed, Grandma. In my house and in my heart. Good, she whispered. Now pour me another cup of tea. And then tell me about this new business idea you have. I have some capital looking for an investment. I poured the tea. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and crimson, I felt a profound shift in the universe. The girl who had been the scapegoat, the girl who had been the victim, was gone. In her place sat a woman with $42 million and the wisdom to protect it. My parents were probably sitting in a motel room right now, blaming me for their misfortune. Tasha was probably wiping down tables at the Waffle House, wondering where it all went wrong. But up here in the penthouse with the woman who truly loved me, everything was right. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. And as I looked at the lights of the city coming on one by one, I knew that my real life was just beginning. 1 year has passed since the night the lights went out in the ballroom and the truth came into the light. The seasons have changed over Atlanta, turning from the humid heat of that chaotic summer to a crisp golden autumn, and now settling into a mild, hopeful spring. I am standing on the terrace of my penthouse, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, watching the city breathe below me. From this height, the cars look like toys, and the noise of the traffic is just a gentle hum. It is quiet up here. It is the kind of quiet I used to dream about when I was sleeping on a cot in the gardening shed, listening to the rats scratch in the walls. I took a sip of my wine. It is a vintage Cabernet, full-bodied and rich. I bought the case at an auction not to show off, but because I simply enjoyed the taste. That is the difference between my life now and the life my family tried to fake. I don't buy things to impress people I don't like. I buy things because they bring me joy. My phone vibrated on the glass table. I glanced at the screen. It was a notification from the Hattie Jenkins Scholarship Fund. We had just approved our first round of grants. 10 young women from underprivileged backgrounds were going to college next semester, fully paid for. No loans, no debt, no strings attached. I named the scholarship after Grandma because I wanted her name to be associated with generosity and truth, not the fraud my parents had turned it into. I looked back into the living room through the sliding glass doors. Grandma Hattie was sitting in her favorite armchair reading a mystery novel. She looked younger than she had in years. The stress of watching her legacy being pilfered was gone. She caught me looking and gave me a little wave before turning the page. She was safe. She was loved. And she was the queen of her own castle again. The justice system had moved with surprising speed once the IRS got involved. Kyle's trial had lasted only 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The video of him mocking me, combined with the forensic accounting records Evelyn unearthed, left him no room to maneuver. He tried to cry on the stand. He tried to blame my mother. He tried to blame the pressure of society. But the judge, a stern woman who had no patience for entitled men, sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. 12 years. He would miss his son's childhood. He would miss the prime of his life. He traded his freedom for a Porsche he couldn't afford, and a lifestyle he didn't earn. Tasha was still working at the diner. I stopped by once a month, not to gloat but to check on her. She looked tired, but she also looked real. She had moved into a small apartment near the highway. She was learning how to budget. She was learning how to be a mother without a nanny. We weren't best friends and we probably never would be, but the venom was gone. She was paying me back slowly, $50 at a time. It would take her a lifetime to clear the debt, but the money wasn't the point. The point was the effort. As for my parents, their fall was the hardest to watch because it was so absolute. After the foreclosure, they moved into a two-bedroom rental on the south side of the city. It was a far cry from the gated community in Buckhead. The church had asked them to step down from their leadership positions. The social circle they had cultivated for 30 years vanished overnight. I saw my father once at the grocery store. He was wearing an old tracksuit, pushing a cart with a wobbly wheel. He looked at a package of steaks, then put them back and picked up ground beef. He looked defeated. He didn't see me, and I didn't approach him. There was nothing left to say. They had chosen their path when they forged my signature. I reached into the pocket of my shawl and pulled out an envelope. It had arrived in the mail that morning. The return address was stamped in red ink, USP Atlanta, SP. Department of Corrections. It was from Kyle. I had debated whether to open it. Part of me wanted to know what he had to say. Part of me wanted to see if he was finally sorry. But as I held the cheap paper in my hand, I realized that his words didn't matter anymore. His apologies were currency in a country where I no longer lived. If he was sorry, he could tell it to the walls of his cell. If he was angry, he could tell it to the guards. I was not his confessor, and I was certainly not his savior. I walked over to the small table where a vanilla-scented candle was burning. The flame danced in the gentle breeze. I held the corner of the unopened envelope to the fire. The paper curled and blackened, then burst into a small orange flame. I held it until the heat licked my fingertips, then I dropped it into the ceramic ashtray and watched it turn to ash. It was a simple act, but it felt like the final chain breaking. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is a heavy thing to carry, and I had put it down. I felt light. I felt unburdened. I looked out at the horizon again. The sun had set, leaving streaks of purple and indigo across the sky. I thought about the girl I used to be. The girl who desperately wanted a seat at the table. The girl who thought she had to buy love with silence. I wanted to go back and hug her. I wanted to tell her that one day she wouldn't just have a seat at the table, she would own the whole building. Grandma Hattie called out from the living room, "Amara, come inside. The tea is getting cold and Jeopardy is about to start." I smiled. "Coming, Grandma," I said. I took one last look at the city. They say money cannot buy happiness, and maybe that is true in the abstract. Money cannot fix a broken heart, and it cannot buy you true friends. But tonight, standing here on my own balcony, paid for with my own intelligence, and my grandmother's legacy, I knew the truth. Money can buy distance from people who hurt you. Money can buy the safety to say no. Money can buy the peace of mind to sleep soundly at night. And to me, that was not just happiness. That was freedom. And freedom was the most expensive luxury of all. I slid the glass door shut, locking out the noise of the world, and walked into the warmth of my real home. This story teaches us that your value as a human being is not determined by how much you can give to others, but by how much you respect yourself. Amara spent years thinking that if she just sacrificed enough, her family would finally love her. But true love does not require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. The moment she stopped seeking their validation and started protecting her own peace was the moment she became powerful. We learn that boundaries are not punishments for other people. They are protection for our own souls, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who only love you when you are useful. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience and reclaiming your power. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that they are strong enough to stand on their own. And I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had to cut off a family member to save your own sanity? Tell me your story in the comments below because your voice matters, and you are never alone in this journey. Thank you for watching, and remember that the best revenge is not destroying your enemies, but living a life so beautiful that they become irrelevant.